Yeah, I was talking in the presentation about collective motion.
Yeah.
Did you know that from bacteria, everybody talks about the migrating birds,
Yeah.
but from bacteria to human beings, collective motion is observed and published through fish and locusts and God knows.
I did a bit of investigation a few years ago on how the navigation systems work in ant colonies, and but we can come back to that at a later date. I see that the judge has joined us. Fantastic.
Okay, John.
Yes, indeed. Okay.
Okay, welcome to the Post-Pandemic Provocateurs. Is it all right if we record this conversation?
That's fine with me.
Okay, so Vanya, can you start recording? Or don't?
I'm already started.
Okay, very good. So what we will do is we'll publish it on our website, and we can use your name or not use your name, and then people will either not know who's talking. I don't know why you need to know someone's name to listen to them. I don't know, we're a self-organizing group, so there's nobody in charge. So Nina, do you want to tell us about what the group is, who you are, and what you'd like us to do today?
Me?
Nina.
Oh, me?
That's what
Aye. Thank you very much. Well, the group was initiated back in 2020 in the spring, and it consists of the four of us, and we are very happy. We have, in addition to Joel and Roger, Vanya, because she represents for us one of our main points to be inclusive across the borders, across generations, across professions. And we had only one big public event, which was a bit controversial, because in addition to testimonials from people around the world about education, we had South African performance dancers and performers. But I think that maybe Roger and Joel can add to all of this in a much more literate way.
Vanya, who are you?
I'm Vanya Negrete. I'm from Mexico. I actually live in Mexico. I live in the state of Guanajuato, but the city I actually live in is León, as in lion. I'm a graphic designer. I just got my degree last year. First, so to say, because I haven't gotten my papers. I love editorial design and illustration. It's what I'm passionate about, but getting to know Nina, Joel, and Roger has been really a delight, because I get to know more about other things that I never thought I should be thinking or should be considering in the world. And as they are in other fields that I'm not used to being in, I don't know, it's opened my mind so much, and we get to know so many people, so it's really interesting, and I always talk about the things I've learned here. I may not have traveled abroad, but it feels as if I had.
Joel.
Hey, good morning. I'm not sure if I should refer to you as Your Honor, or the judge. Mr.
Well, I answer to everything pretty well from hey you on up. I don't respond too well to yo fool, but that's the spectrum.
Fair enough. Well, I'm Joel Slayton. I'm professor emeritus here at San Jose State University. I've been involved in the field of art, science, technology, the so-called field, for about 40 plus years. Was at MIT before coming to California and setting up shop here. Started the Cadre Laboratory for New Media back in 1984. And I work as an independent artist and curator. I was director of the Silicon Valley 01 Contemporary Art Biennial for 8 years. So I have multiple hats. And my interest really stems from looking at complex systems and networks in both social and in technological terms, and how we can rethink how we think about how change occurs. And Roger and I and Nina and Vanya have been having quite a few discussions around this idea of how the pandemic has created a platform for us to begin to rethink everything we think about. And we've been involved in a lot of interesting conversations, and I welcome this one today.
Okay, Judge.
Well, obviously the pandemic has had an impact on the legal community and on the judicial process. During the last year and a half, I've conducted hearings on Zoom. And in fact, I actually had a trial involving child custody dispute. And child custody cases are probably the most heated, other than sexual assault, criminal cases that you're going to encounter. And there's been a lot of discussion among the judiciary and a little bit among the lawyers in private practice. And I say this with all charity. They are always looking for the simplest way to make the most money. And that means, hey, I'll sit in my office and I'll have my TV screen camera set up, my video set up, so that I can conduct conferences with clients and so forth. And I don't have to move, but I get a full hour's worth of income just sitting there. And of course, now even more, some firms are doing work from home situations where you don't even have to put on a coat and tie, or well, you put on a coat and tie and nobody sees that you're wearing gym shorts underneath, you know, or that you don't have your shoes on. And I have to confess, in the trial that I conducted, I was wearing my robe and I had a tie on and a shirt and so forth. And I was wearing shorts and I did not have my shoes on. But the more important concern that we have in the technological end of it is, and in this circumstance right now, you can see there could very well be someone behind my TV or behind my computer screen with cue cards telling me what to say. Now, if I'm a witness in a trial, how do I, as the judge, know that that person is testifying from his or her own memory, his or her own senses as to sight or smell or what they heard? That's a problem. And another aspect of the problem is body language. When you're in an open courtroom, if the witness is fidgeting, or if the witness is sitting there like this, the body language betrays whether or not that person is telling the truth, whether or not that person is fudging on the truth, that sort of thing. And you can't do that on Zoom, and you can't do that on Microsoft Teams or any of these video platforms with any assurance that what's happening on the screen is real. And that complicates the judicial process, because we depend so heavily on the authenticity of the evidence that's being offered, the testimony or the exhibits. I had a complaint brought to my attention from a litigant. There was a deposition being conducted, and he was in the deposition, and he noticed that, as a party, and he noticed that the person whose deposition was being taken had his cell phone sitting on the desk, and he was doing this on it during the deposition. And finally, he stopped what was going on. He said, "What are you doing there?" And the guy says, "Well, I'm texting a friend." Well, was the friend giving him the answers to the questions? And immediately, the entire deposition was compromised. And so the line here between the technological capability, which we undoubtedly have, I mean, this meeting is part of that, and the paradigm that we're trying to enhance, namely looking for the truth of a matter, it's getting very fuzzy because of the technological capabilities. And
Okay, thank you, Judge.
sorry about the lecture.
No. And ironically, that was sort of a different narrative that you chose to begin with than when you and I started having our meetings at La Madeleine on Wednesdays. So, Vanya, what would you like to ask the judge?
I don't think I have a question right now. I do have a commenter that is that in Mexico we do not get trials as you do. It's only like some kind of lecture, I'm not sure. And the only time they tried to do a trial with a jury and the attorneys and the witnesses, everything, it was a complete disaster. If I'm not mistaken, it's the trial of Marisela Escobedo. There's actually a documentary on Netflix because they asked the culprit, like, "Hey, did you did it?" And and this man went like, "No, I didn't." And the jury went like, "Well, he didn't do it. Let's free him." And they freed him. And when they were outside the court, he looked at Marisela and he was like, "I'm going back for you," something like that. And then he killed her and he's on the run since then. And it's awful because he killed her daughter and there was no justice.
Okay, so I think, Judge, so you talked about having hearings on Zoom and trials on Zoom, but in Mexico, they don't do it the same way.
Well, that's right. And your system in Mexico is essentially the civil system that I'm familiar with in Europe. You don't have a jury under normal circumstances. What you have is a panel of judges, anywhere from 3 to 5. It's an odd number. And they listen to the evidence and so forth. Also, the role of the attorneys in your system is very different because the attorneys, as officers of the court, tend, and now I'm familiar more with criminal cases in your system than with civil cases, but the lawyers are not necessarily advocates for their client. They are very often, how shall I put it, more neutral than you would encounter in the United States. For example, I was in Poland some years ago and was in a trial, witness to trial, where this fellow was charged with murder. And the judge, the presiding judge, had a stack of evidence this high in front of him. And he said, "Now, Mr. So-and-so, you on page 320, it talks about a knife wound 2 inches deep and 1 inch wide and so forth. Do you have any explanation for that? And the defendant says, well, yeah, I stabbed him. Well, I mean, obviously, the question of guilt or innocence is pretty well over at that point. But his lawyer, to my amazement, turned to him and said, would you like to explain that? And so he proceeds to give this long-winded explanation as to what happened. They were drinking, they got into a quarrel, and he pulled a knife and stabbed the guy. And, you know, and I'm sitting here saying to myself, you're the defense lawyer. But what you did was effectively prosecute your own client. And I'm going, man, in the United States, that lawyer would lose his license, but that's a different issue. But yes, your system in Mexico is quite different. But when you have witnesses, you can still see their body language and so forth because, and now, am I correct that in the Mexican court system, the witness is standing up when he testifies?
I'm really not sure. I've tried to avoid law students because here in Mexico, they tend to be really petty and I don't know. I don't really like them, but I do know a little bit of law since I got a class in high school, but not so much.
You know, in England, they do. They stand up. And so their body language is very much a part of their testimony. Excuse me. Yes, sir. You have your hand up.
Oh, so I just want to return to this question about authenticity for a second, because it's really challenging. I can't imagine. So of course, it's not just on the part of the witnesses that you point out where the complications occur. It could also be a complications on the part of the judge or on the part of the jury, if you will. And so there is this, but as we know, and as you pointed out, that we're moving in our political and economic trajectory of efficiency. And it seems to be true across all sectors of our society. And there may not be any turning back from this. You know, I mean, I don't know, but there may not be a turning back to the old ways of doing it. So the question then becomes, well, what can we do to ensure that authenticity is present? And so, for example, and it's just hypothetical, there could be the use of AI-driven systems to monitor the behaviors of all the participants, the litigants, the jury, the judge, to detect whether or not there are nuances in their behaviors that might be clues or give away their lack of authenticity. And so I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are about the trajectory of how we're moving forward here. In that, I can't have a very hard time seeing that we're going to go back to, you know, of not ever using Zoom for these things again. I mean, it seems like that's now part of the way it's going to be done. So how are we going to deal with this issue of authenticity?
Okay, basically you've asked two questions. First, deals with the essential nature of the judicial process. Courts are unique to the human condition. You don't find them anywhere else in nature. You don't find them in anthills or beehives or any place else. And they are absolutely created by human beings to resolve issues on an interpersonal level that the individuals can't resolve. And historically, it has evolved from being two people wrapped in iron, beating each other up, and the guy who's last man standing wins, to today we have a jury trial and whatnot. But so in a sense, there's no such thing as going back.
Okay.
There is simply something, there is an institution there that has to face a certain technological reality. Now, that said, your AI point is right on point, because this year in Texas, for the first time, was administered what's called the UBE, the Uniform Bar Examination. This is facilitated by a software program called Exemplify. And Exemplify does exactly what you were talking about. The person who is taking the bar exam, and it's all online, taking the bar exam, has his or her computer set up with the video camera and everything like that. And the program monitors the eye contact.
Mhm.
So if the person who is taking the exam looks away, that is picked up by the program, so that when that person's examination is replayed, the question is immediately raised whether or not, looking away, he was looking at a cue card to get the answer to a particular question. And so that is an example of the AI that's already in place. The bar exam, the UBE, has been administered in Texas twice, once in February and once in July, with this program. And the examinee has to purchase the program, and you have to have a computer that's compatible with it. Now, my wife, the one reason I know about this, my wife decided she was going to take the bar exam after she graduated from law school 20 years ago. And so she took the bar exam. We had to buy a new laptop for her to have the Exemplify program in it. Now, the next stage, and this is something that I've discussed in an article I've written called Cross-Examination of the Computer. And that is, what about holograms where the person died before the trial, but his or her deposition was taken? You now create a hologram of that person. You have the mouth moving in response to questions and so forth, as if they were being questioned live, when in fact they were questioned in a deposition maybe a year ago.
Mhm.
All of that is technologically possible. There's no question about that. The real question is, do you really want to do that? How does that enhance the truth finding and dispute resolution nature of what courts are there to do?
Okay, very good, Judge. So Vanya just sent us a reminder that we're not trying to be over efficient in these meetings. So in about 10 minutes, well, the session will die, and then we have to log in again. Otherwise, we'd have to pay extra money every month.
Oh, yeah.
Record it longer than 40 minutes. You know, where that idea came from. Anyway, but I'd like to bring Nina into the conversation. So Nina was, her family is from Hungary, and she had the most horrendous life getting out from communist legal systems into the freedom of the West. Go ahead, Nina. Tell us about your journey.
Well, I have to start with saying that it was horrendous, but I'm not alone. So whatever I say, thousands and thousands and thousands of people have suffered under communism, and under millions have suffered under Nazism, and today there are other millions who are suffering. So I, you know, when as you put it, Roger, it sounds too horrendous. It is horrendous, but there are many of us who had it horrendous. And it's not only getting out. Getting out was bad enough for many reasons. I'm not going to tell you the whole, but you know, it was under machine gun fire, and it was a miracle that we survived. But before that, I grew up in this dictatorial regime, and that was just as bad, including the Hungarian Revolution and including anything. So it's very difficult to put such a thing in a very small capsule, but they certainly, in any regime like that, they do their best to humiliate you, to persecute you, prosecute your whole family for various funded and unfunded reasons. And you have to fight. You have to fight in order just to survive. And I have been fighting since I'm 8 years old.
Okay, so maybe should we let the machine tell us when to stop, Vanya? Okay, so let's just keep going. So, you know, one of the ideas that the judge has now been working on for a long time, and his article on cross-examining the computer sort of captures some of the ideas he's been trying to convince his friends who are judges or lawyers that we are at a very difficult time in the legal system, certainly the American legal system, where, and I'm going to exaggerate just for emphasis, where so much of the evidence is provided by machines, not by people. And machines change their mind just like people's change their mind. And we tend to trust what machines say more than what people say. And you want to just give us an example of techno evidence, Judge, that really made it crystallize in your head?
Well, a good example is, and one that I suspect all of you can relate to, an ATM machine at a bank. You put your card in, and this is a true case, by the way. This fellow puts a card in, punches up $200. The machine says it gave him $200, but it didn't. It gives him his card back, gives him a receipt, but it doesn't give him any money. And so he ends up suing the bank for his money. Now, that made it sound kind of silly, suing a bank for $200, but the bank basically had cheated him. Well, the witness in the case for the bank was a computer printout created by the ATM, which had not given him the money, which says it did give him the money. Well, under the law, even a computer printout has to be authenticated in some way. So a bank officer signs an affidavit that says this is a true and correct record of this machine. On cross-examination by the plaintiff's lawyer, he asked the bank officer, did you create this record? He says, well, no, I didn't do it. The machine printed it out. So how do you know it's telling the truth? Well, oops. And all of a sudden, the bank's case began to collapse because you can't cross-examine the machine.
And you acquitted you penalized the bank, and
You bet.
got their money.
The bank ended up having not only to give this guy his $200, but pay his attorney's fees, which were much more than $200.
What the banks do now is they put video cameras in ATM machines so they can prove that you actually took the cash out of the machine.
Well, no, those cameras don't do that. They authenticate that you are the person who conducted the transaction, but the range of the lens doesn't go down to the slot where the money is supposed to come out. And that's a problem.
Judge, a moment ago, you referred to the machine as the witness.
Oh, yeah,
And
sure.
do you mean that literally? In this, because what I'm thinking is, in a way, I hope so. I mean, I hope that's I hope that's literally what you meant, because I mean, in this society that we live in, corporations are considered equivalent to individuals in that some legal sense. So why shouldn't machines be considered legitimate, individuals within the legal system?
Well, and that's the thing. The machine is capable of generating the evidence, but human beings have to be able to authenticate that the machine is telling the truth. And the classic example is, and I don't know if this has ever happened to you all, but you get a bill from a department store for purchases that you didn't make. You go in and you say, excuse me, I need to have this corrected. Well, I'm sorry, but it's in the computer. As if somehow that makes it authentic and true. No, it doesn't. And that's why people have to authenticate what the machine does. And the reason, and the secondary reason behind that is machines are fallible.
But the problem here that I see, and I'm just speculating, but one of the problems that I see is that humans do not have the capacity to authenticate the machine, because the sophistication of the systems are becoming so complex that it will become increasingly difficult for any single human being to say, yeah, I validate that.
Okay.
It's kind of like there's no single individual on the face of the planet that understands how it's.
Now, everybody has to click the link again to come in again.
Right.
Okay.
So we're waiting until we're getting booted out, or we.
I'll end this one and you just click again.
Okay, I see we're not quite all there yet.
Okay.
So Joel, are you back?
Yeah, I'm here. Let me get my video
So,
going.
let me just suggest a switch. So the reason I happen to know this evil man, Judge John Marshall, the Honorable Evil Man, is because he's a member of the International Academy of Astronautics. And that's because, and I'd like you just to explain, he worked on the Apollo program and wrote a early history of the Apollo program. And before you do that, I used to work on NASA projects. And before you launched the satellite, you had a dress rehearsal. And let me tell you, the number of times we pretended to launch the rocket and the computer had a bug, I mean, it would have blown up. So, that's called buggy software. And yeah, so you have to practice the launch several times. And then, oh, we got to 1 hour before the launch this time. Great. Oh, we got to 30 minutes before the launch this time. And it is amazing how in this, talk about a complex system, all the computers it takes to launch one rocket. And there's no way you can test it automatically to make sure it doesn't have a bug in it.
Let me give you.
Anyway, Judge, take over with your history of the Apollo program and how this ties into your thinking.
Well, let me address the question of how can human beings authenticate complex mechanical structures. And to my mind, the simplest example is DNA testing. We have very simple, it's simple now, it was not simple in 1984, but it's simple now, testing to determine whether or not an individual is or is not related to somebody else, or whether an individual was or was not at the scene of a crime or participated in a crime, of any number of things like that. How do we do it? We take a sample of their DNA, maybe a strand of hair, swab from a cheek, scrapings under fingernails if it's a corpse that's involved. And these are then submitted to various tests with machines, which have been very consistent in their performance over the last 40 years. Consistency of outcome is one way to authenticate a machine. So that, for example, and when I retired, I was assigned to a special court that dealt with child abuse and also with child support. And we would have these reports on DNA that established that this person was the father of this child, and it was a 99.9999999 probability that that was true. Well, how many nines do you have to have for it to become real in the mind of the judge or the jury? Not many more than what was presented to me. And so, yeah, you have that. But look at the converse of that. If you go strictly to a system where you put the facts in at this end and the law in at this end, and then you push a button and it spits out a judgment, you have utterly eliminated the human factor in the judicial process. Is that what you want? Is that the kind of court you want? Because I'll tell you, and I believe that Professor Cegledi will agree with that, that's the kind of court you have in a communist or a Nazi regime. There is no humanity to it.
My argument
5 minutes they take it. And in China today, if you're convicted of rape, you're tried in a football stadium, and the entire audience in the football stadium pronounces that you're guilty, and you're taken out of the stadium, and as you walk down the tunnel, they shoot you in the back of the head, and they send your family a bill for the bullet. That's the truth.
May I add that in a totalitarian regime, it's not only the court as we have it here in me in Canada, you in the US.
Mhm.
In every company, you have a court.
Oh, sure.
And so I myself, at the age of 17, because a communist party person accused me of taking a letter, a company letter, to the American embassy, which was an ordinary letter. I mean, no American embassy would be interested in it. But this guy wanted to get rid of me. So there was a company court. And the guys, well, it was all guys, the guys, they all loved me. They really liked me. And so each of them came to me and said, Nina, I'm very, very sorry, but we have to do this. And the only thing we can do for you, that instead of, letting you go in a way whereby you can never get another job or go to school, we will make it the best possible. But please believe me, I have 3 children. I just have to keep my job.
Yeah. And
Okay,
so,
so,
you have a situation.
We have about 10 minutes left, Judge. So this
Okay,
is where...
going to the space program.
Well, no. We have 10 minutes left. So now for the post-pandemic provocateurs, we don't throw sticks or stones or bullets, we throw ideas. So what idea do you have that could address your concerns and the facts you've explained to us? How do we change the legal system in America?
I think that what we need to focus on is what is the purpose of the judicial process under the American historical reality. And I have to say this, particularly for those of you who are not from the United States historically. The American legal system is the product of our very peculiar revolutionary history. The Bill of Rights is absolutely straight out of the colonial period in American history. And it is a direct reaction to how the British handle things. And I hate to tell you this, but if you were caught up in a British court today in the United Kingdom, you'd be pretty much what the American colonists faced in 1775, before the revolution ever took place. Their law hasn't changed much. Ours has. As times have moved on, the trick, I think, going to what Roger's asking, is how do we reconcile and authenticate what a machine is telling us happened and accept that as a fact? And going back to the DNA thing, I think if we're dealing with certain machines that have been in use for a long period of time, that authenticates them. But brand new technology, I think Joel has a very good point that you've got to have people who are technically, have a technical background to explain it to a jury, who is usually made up of housewives, accountants, truck drivers, and whatnot. They don't have that technological specialization as part of their background. I had a case where the lawyers were arguing over some a physical injury that had occurred, and they mentioned that the brain of the individual had been damaged, so it did not produce as much acetylcholine as it had done and it would do in a normal brain. My court reporter said, "How do you spell that?" And I leaned over the bench and I said, ACETYLCHOLINE. And the two lawyers looked at each other like they had stepped through the looking glass and I had stepped out of a flying saucer. And I said, "Proceed, counselors." And they kept going. And when we took a break, she came into my office. She said, "How in the world did you know that?" And I said, "You forget. I spent 3.5 years in the space program." I said, "These things are not novel." I said, "I just happened to know it." And I said, "I'm sorry I brought the trial to a screeching halt, but there it was." And of course, the lawyers had no idea of that background because I don't discuss it here in Dallas particularly. How do you explain to your neighbors that you stood there on your balcony with a drink in your hand and watched people fly to the moon? I mean, that doesn't relate to somebody who's going out to North Park to buy a Neiman Marcus dress. But the thing is that yeah, you've got to educate, I think, and one of the things I've talked to Roger about, you have to include in the law school curriculum something that acquaints the lawyers with the problems of technologically generated evidence brought into the courtroom. How do you authenticate it?
And that's not done today.
No, it's not done today. No, it's not part of any law school curriculum that I've ever seen. And I can tell you from my own experience in talking to lawyers and other judges about this problem, maybe 2 minutes into the conversation, they glaze over because they are essentially people with a fine arts or a humanistic background that has no relationship to orbital velocity. And they just don't know.
No, but actually, Judge, I find myself in the same situation in our research lab in the university. The students come to me, I mean, the artificial intelligence software terminology is evolving so quickly that they keep saying, "Oh yeah, I'm using a much better version. I don't use deep learning anymore. I use something else."
Mm-hmm.
And, we're the AI, it's evolving so quickly. And as you said, companies are adopting it before it's really been tested. And the recent case, we had a student in our lab who applied for a job in a company, and it was an AI bot that did the interviewing. So the AI bot just interviewed 400 people and then ranked them and then decided who was going to be hired. No eye contact with a human. It was just AI software that did the hiring. Well, you know, we already have trouble making human beings unbiased. How do you make computers unbiased when you don't know what, are you racist or sexist, or, it's a complicated question of the implicit biases of a computer. Oh yeah, it happened too quickly, therefore I didn't notice it.
Yeah, well, I suggested that a good example of the problem is the recent motion picture Ex Machina, where you're dealing very much with machines, with AI and so forth. But fundamentally, and this is the ethical issue that I've been grappling with since 1995, the ethical question that has to be dealt with is what's more important? Human beings and their ability to move freely in the world, or the ability of machines to control human beings with the idea that the machines know best. The problem ultimately with that is the machines could very well decide that human beings are so, how shall I put it?
Unpredictable.
Useless.
Unpredictable and untidy that they need to be disposed of.
Okay, Judge. Joel.
I just saw that there's one sort of in between that spectrum, I think, which is I'm working on using synthetic text generation to generate manuscripts from manuscripts that I had previously written 20 years ago. And it is about, I would say, 85% authentic, in the sense that I would have written the outcome had I written it, but I didn't. So it becomes a representation of me in the virtual space that I'm okay with. In other words, it becomes a kind of heavily biased avatar in the virtual environment that is an extension of myself. So now does that entity, it's sort of the opposite of what you were saying a moment ago, Roger.
Where you understand, Nina's going to jump in. So you say you take 20 articles that you've written. So let's take 20 articles the judge has written, and then let's have that software write a new article in the name of the judge.
Correct.
Do you know how to do that?
Yes.
And so, but now that the question is,
I'm Judge.
who's the creator of the article? You or the software?
No, but Judge, would you be willing to
Both.
let Joel
Both.
analyze 10, 20 of your articles and generate a new article and see what you think of it?
Not really, because it wouldn't be mine.
No, but well, we wouldn't publish it without your authorization.
No, I understand that part, but
it's a question of whose is it? Does it belong to the machine? Does it belong to you? Is it an
does it belong to the creator of the software, by the way? The software that you're using to rewrite your own articles, did you create that software?
No, Google did it.
Okay.
Okay, Nina.
And as a matter of trademark and patent law, let me just say, the argument would be very strong that Google, in fact, owns that reproduced article.
Yeah.
They are the author of it, and they own it.
Nina.
I just would like to say that AI is coming more and more in our everyday culture. I just heard the talk from Christine Paul. She is a curator at the Whitney Museum in New York. And she was talking about the fact, this is a fact already, that 3 big biennales next year are curated through AI, not by human curators.
So the artists that are picked to show their work in the Museum of Modern Art are picked by a machine, not by a human.
Yes.
Do we want to live in that world?
Yes.
Where the machines may decide we're unnecessary? They can create the art too. We don't need humans to create the art.
What you're articulating
a lot of bad stuff.
Issue. it is the fundamental ethical question: humans or technology. There really is a dichotomy there, and when you start blurring that line, humans lose. You had a point.
Not a point, but I had a professor on uni that told us that we were going to get replaced by AI in the future. And I was like, well, then what am I studying if I'm going to be replaced by something that can make what I do?
Okay, let me inject. So if you go back 50 years when I was in high school, technology was a labor-saving device so human beings could have more vacations. Has the work week shrunk? No. You know, so this promise that technology was a labor-saving device was a myth. If you look at 50 years of new technologies, you know, yes, the French have a 35-hour work week in quotes, but to pay the rent, you have to have 2 jobs. So they're, you know, 2 35-hour-a-week jobs. And so, yeah, I think we've sort of slipped into a situation. I mean, and science fiction has been full of this stuff, as you mentioned, John. So, you know, we knew it was coming. We're there. What do we do now? You know,
Well,
how do you know, we don't throw sticks and stones and guns. What do we do now to address this fundamental ethical issue? And it's not, and as you just explained, it's not just a legal system where this is really a fundamental conflict.
No, the legal system is where the ethics of this relationship really collide, and then have immediate impact on individual human beings in the form of a judgment. And the judgment is rendered either by a court, a judge, or by the jury. And now, and for example, one of the things that has been talked about is having specialized courts that deal only with very sophisticated machinery questions, property rights, and so forth, that those judges and juries should be people who have engineering backgrounds and so on. In a way, you already have that because you have the Court of Patent Appeals, and you have, actually, there are a couple of federal judges that I know personally who have engineering degrees or mathematics. One has an engineering degree and one has a PhD in mathematics. So these people are able to understand orbital velocities. But the vast majority of judges are much more acquainted with Da Vinci than they are with the code.
We'll quote you on that. Are you familiar with Da Vinci or are you familiar with the code?
Exactly. I've been lucky. I've had a lot of exposure to both.
Okay, so to be honest, Judge, I think we've started to be auto-poetic here. I think, you know, let's keep talking for a while, but I think, I don't know what you feel, Nina, Vanya, Joel, maybe we can step back and refocus and see what we might talk about with the judge again. Because, I mean, talk about a strange mix of 5 people here, and we seem to have an overlapping ethical concern coming at it. You know, why did you get a university degree and you still can't get the certificate a year later, Vanya? If the machines are going to do the work anyway, why should I go to university?
Why shouldn't I just sit at home with my computer?
and Joel, you know, why should I ever write another article? I'm just going to take all the articles I've written and you know, redigest them, and it'll republish six new articles, original articles for me. So why bother writing anymore? You know, just write 10 articles, and then the rest of your life, the AI will glue it together in different ways. Okay, so John, I don't know why you and I have started this discussion so intensely during the pandemic. You have very strange experience. You used to, which university in Poland did you used to teach at, John?
It's the Marie Curie Skłodowska University, UMCS in
So,
Lublin.
you know, you've been exposed to the Central European point of view on these things.
Oh, yeah, because I started there in 1993 when Poland was just emerging from communism and the military government. And so I've had an opportunity to be a very informed observer of that transition into what Poland has become in the years since.
Okay, so let's be very blunt. Do you think the American system is more ethical than the Polish system today?
It's different. I would never.
God damn you, you're right. That's
Well,
not a true or false
when I
question.
first started teaching in Poland, I took with me little copies of the Constitution and so forth. And I told my students, I said, I'm not here to tell you that you need to import the American system to Poland because your history is so different from the American history. I'm simply here to tell you.
Don't tell that to a computer.
Well, that's right. You know, but the thing is that the historical experience of Hungary or of Germany or of Mexico or of the United States, those histories are dramatically different, and they color the how shall I put it? They color the outlook of anybody who has grown up in those systems.
Okay, so you do not want to impose any system on the rest of the world. And that's the first time I've heard a left-wing idea from you.
Well, because we have the most recent example being Afghanistan, but Vietnam is another example. The American model simply doesn't work anywhere else in the world except in America. And we need, as Americans, we need to grow up, put on our man pants, and say, yeah, that's right. We can't nation build, we can't nation tear down and rebuild something in our image. It doesn't work. Lyndon Johnson wrote a constitution for the Republic of Vietnam, which was a complete disaster. We launched into a 20-year war in Afghanistan of nation building after 2003, and that mission has ended in a complete failure and utter collapse. And you can point to whatever you
Okay,
want.
Judge, can we end on a hopeful note?
Sure.
So what do we do given all of this? What would you like the post-pandemic provokers to think about and work on?
I'd like to see the courts not back away from the technological tools that are available to more effectively manage the cases. Some courts, some states are pretty far in advance. Texas is one of them. Everything is done electronically now. It's all filed electronically. It's stored electronically in secure servers and so forth. That said, going back to Joel's point, how can we be sure that nobody has monkeyed with some of that? And that's the question. The next question that has to be answered by a better security system in the courts, because everybody on this webcast knows if it's digitally stored, it can be modified. It's that simple.
For me, the central question in all of this has to do with this, I think what you're pointing to repeatedly, which is the ethics of authenticity. Like, what do we really mean by that in this coming century?
Why do you use the word authenticity? Why do you use the word authenticity? It's a little bit unusual in this context.
Not really, because authenticity goes to the very heart of the fact-finding process.
Is it real? Did it really happen?
Did it really happen? Is it legitimate? And that sort of thing. Our system of justice and this is my experience in the courts, and historically, I think it's true. This is a system, the jury system works very, very well if the witnesses are making an honest effort to recite what they saw, smelled, felt, or heard. It breaks down almost irretrievably if anyone sets out to lie. And I've seen it both ways. And I have actually in my career, I have stopped a trial dead in its tracks when I knew the guy was lying. I called the lawyers into my office and I said, we're not going any further with this one. This guy's going to go visit the sheriff because he's lying. And I've already given him his
Have
warning.
you sent people to jail based on the evidence from machines?
Do what now? I'm sorry?
Have you sent people to jail based on evidence from machines?
Yep.
And you think in some cases that it turned out later that the evidence had been wrong?
No, what turned out later was that I was correct, that the person was attempting to deceive the court.
In that case, yeah. Okay, I don't know. I'm just trying to relieve my anxiety, Judge.
All you got to do, Roger, is tell the truth. That way you don't have to remember what you said.
No. So in the colloquium last Friday, we got into a discussion with several of the faculty members, and I said it's time to write a book. Maybe one of our students can write The Rise and Fall of Western Civilization. And my colleague, who's an expert in Holocaust studies, says, boy, you're all doom and gloom, Roger. But then that really made me think. I think the problem is our concept of civilization. And you know, the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, it was the pirates who made all the discoveries and the emperors who took credit for them. So I think it's the concept of civilization that we need to rethink. And that's where the authenticity, we want to be in a civil society where authentic people have happy lives or something. I know that sounds a little bit too optimistic, but
or where we are in a society where the machines that we deploy at our service represent an authenticity that we can rely on.
Well, it's a question really at its root. Do we wish to have machines that serve us, or do we want to be servants of the machine? And frankly, this goes back to Star Trek. I don't want to be a servant of a machine. The ultimate computer is the
I now have an artificial hip, so I'm now bionic. Am I still human, or am I now also a machine?
It seems to me we've passed that point. We're all subject to our service to machines.
Well, as
no, but not necessarily. But how far does that go?
No, as Bernard Spiegel said, a cell phone is not a tool; it's an organ of your body. If you lose your phone, you might die.
That's why I don't use it.
It is frightening now where the phone remembers things I don't know. My wife's phone number, I don't remember it. He needs to remember it. My phone remembers it. But if I lose my phone, how do I call my wife? So I think we've become symbiotic with our machines. And so you're either or. Do we want to be the slaves of the machines or the machines to be our slaves? We're going to be symbiotic beings where we're part human and part machine.
Well, but that to me is how shall I put it? That really begs the question, because can we throw away these machines and do without them? Sure, we did without them 40 years ago. None of this didn't exist 40 years ago.
Okay, you're not holding anything. Does anybody see a phone in his hand?
It'll show up eventually.
No, did you do that? How did you do that?
The green screen
The,
disappeared.
the
Put up
green
your
screen
phone
doesn't
again.
pick it up.
Put up
Yeah.
your phone again.
Yeah, okay, let me try it again. There you go.
There
No,
it
put
is.
it in front of the background.
Yeah,
No, not in front of you.
see, it's looking at you
disappears
all
when you
now.
put it in front of the background.
It goes, if it goes in front of the background, it disappears.
Okay, so, okay.
So is it
Well-
really there?
But that machine,
Okay, Ken Goldberg, we need you to tell epistemology.
you have to remember, I think that Professor Chigledi and I are probably the only people who were born before CDs were invented.
I am always the oldest everywhere.
Well, see.
Valia?
No, I thought, but I thought I was born before CDs. But no, I was born before DVDs.
So movie is not a real term to you, is it?
Yeah, it is. I was born in the VHS era, so I used to have my chunk of VHS, and yeah. And when DVDs became a thing, my grandmother used to buy me knockoff DVDs and such.
But my point is that it's only been a very short period of time that we have had this level of technology that is
Yeah.
instantly available to everybody. And Facebook is a perfect example of one of the problems that Roger talked about. Okay, so you have a 40-hour work week. The studies show that 1/4 of that week is spent on Facebook by the average worker.
Not
And-
me.
and-
I am not on Facebook.
So now you,
That's a shift from looking at television 8 hours a day.
oh yeah, well, but now you can make the
So-
argument
Why my television?
that a modern corporation is being run by a committee on Facebook 25% of the time. That's insanity,
It is.
Okay, so that gets us into the.
but it's real. It may be
Okay.
insanity, but it's real.
And not likely to go away.
Okay,
And not
seriously,
likely to
Judge,
go away.
So.
No, it's not. But I'm going to be afraid. It's going to be here, but I will be gone.
It'll go
there's a
away
big
when
discussion
Section
today in
230 of
America.
the Federal Act disappears, or when these companies get sued for defamation.
Okay, but, okay, Judge, there's a big discussion in America in the last few days because scientists studied how young women reacted to using Instagram every day. And the young women who used Instagram were more depressed, more suicidal than the ones who did not.
Yes.
And Instagram's, oh, that's a correlation, that's not causation.
They did the study. Facebook
Yeah.
did that study.
Yeah.
Sorry?
It was an internal study. That's Facebook doing its own
Yeah,
study.
they had the data and
They did their own
found young
study.
women who spent more time on Instagram were more likely to commit suicide.
There's a study about young women going into like asking to get surgeries, cosmetic surgeries, based on what filters tell them their face should look like, or so to say. But these filters, most of them are Eurocentric, because I mean I have a broad nose, not so much, but I have a broad nose. And when I use them, my nose is like as if I was European, and it's like it's not the only standard of beauty, but younger women, most of them do not understand that beauty is not like that. I mean, there's hundreds of millions of people in the world with all ethnic backgrounds, and I mean,
But now then,
yeah,
the
yours in the
question-
beauty is the standard, but I mean,
But
you
they-
can be beautiful if you're black or white. I don't know.
Excuse me, how big is the sample size of these studies? Are they controls? You know, my first degree is in genetics, human biology. I mean, you couldn't ever publish these things before.
But
Now
now-
you can Facebook can have a publication of it, but
now
it's
there's
not
a- but
true.
also
science.
You have the issue, if what you're saying about, noses and so forth is, what does that say about the view of hundreds of, or perhaps even thousands of young women about white supremacists? If it's a Eurocentric model that they want, what about white supremacy? And what does that do to this myth that's circulating in the United States? Makes it look rather stupid, I think. But, and the corollary argument, in fact, an acquaintance of mine just announced that his nephew had come out as transgender. Well, I'm sorry, but, and this goes back to DNA, there's no such thing as transgender. Your gender is not a choice.
I would beg to disagree.
How can you change your DNA?
You cannot change your DNA, but the
That's my case.
thing is that transgender is not something that is on your genitals or in your brain. I mean, yes, there are 3 ways to identify its sexual orientation, which is who you are attracted to, gender identity, which is the gender you are more close to in binary, for so to say, and sex identity, which is your genitalia. These are 3 different things. And yes, you cannot change,
Okay, so
you cannot
let
choose
me
to
do
change your
concept.
genitalia from one
No,
night to
but let me do concept transfer. There is lots of evidence that people in the same family often have the same profession. Farmers' children are farmers. That's not genetic. It's epigenetics. Some things are transmitted culturally, not through the DNA. And you are the company you keep. So indeed, you may have the DNA of a man, but if you spend all your childhood among women, well, you might have a different gender